foundation of where all the bucktail tying kind of originates from and where all fly design kind of stems from there. So once you have a good grasp on that, you can kind of level up and take it to the, the next level and challenge yourself with new designs. I'm just going to go over some quick bucktail basics. I'm sure a lot of you guys know that, but I'm just going to bring everybody up to speed just in case we're not all on the same page. So every bucktail is just a little bit different. There's little nuances that make it different. If you get a good bucktail like this one, the fibers are pretty consistent throughout the whole tail. But usually at the top, these ones are a little less hollow and they've got a little bit more wave to them. And these ones down at the base have a little bit more of a stem. They got some more hollow attributes to them. These ones flare really nicely. And then these ones at the top are good for like tailing materials because these will not flare that good. This is called the A side of a bucktail. And this is called the B side of the bucktail. And a lot of people, once they get through their A side, they just chuck the bucktail, but there's a lot of good stuff on here. This is essentially, deer body hair. And this fiber right here, this spins very nicely. So we'll be using all of that type of stuff today. What else I want to go over? Yeah, so before we start tying flies, I'm just going to show you a couple bucktail techniques for tying in bucktail. The first one is a straight tie-in. So what we're going to do is just put down a thread wrap. Good thread base like you normally would. And then, cut off a good section of bucktail for your tail portion of the fly. So I'm just going to grab some up here. All right, so I grabbed about a little bit more than a pencil's worth. And what you're going to do is kind of grab it towards the end here and pull out all of these under fibers. That's bad stuff, and it's just going to make your tail harder to work with. And then sometimes when you get down towards the base of the tail, there's going to be a lot of that underbrush. And you can take a comb that on out so it's nice and ready to work with. And then we can cut it flat. All right, we're ready to start tying. So a good trick with the thread that you're using, a lot of the tying thread is flat. And if you were to just start cranking on it like this, it doesn't put like a good solid amount of even pressure. So you'll see a lot of tires spinning their bobbin. So if you're right-handed, you're going to want to spin that bobbin counterclockwise, and that'll make the thread jump back towards your knuckles there. If you were to spin it clockwise, it's going to want to jump up towards the eye of the hook. So we're going to spin that around. I usually do a couple, like 2 or 3 loose wraps, just like that. And that kind of puts it in place. And now with my index finger, my thumb, I can kind of pinch it around and move it, get it into position. And now I can crank on this. And now when you're wrapping the bucktail, you want to make consistent wraps with consistent pressure. You don't want to pull straight down and then do it loose on the top. You want to come around and be really consistent with that. So right now we're kind of just doing what's called the straight tie-in, like I said, and this is really good for tail sections of flies. If you see your bucktail starting to flare out like this on the tail side, you can start doing some looser wraps towards the back here and then come back up towards the front, and that should tame it down pretty good. So that's called a straight tie-in. I'm going to pull this out here. Can everybody see okay? Should I bring my camera closer? You good? Maybe I'll bring it a little bit closer. All right. So now the next tie-in technique we're going to do, this is called a bulkhead tie-in or a hollow tie-in. And this is where Bob Popovic really got famous for working with bucktail. So what we're going to do is, instead of starting at the butts to tie in, we're going to pull out a little bit of that butt section, and we're going to tie it in about a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch up. Again, a couple loose wraps, work it into place. And now you're going to pull straight down on your bobbin and start spinning. And what that does is it creates this big head, which kind of looks like a Buford, but what we're going to do is we're going to push it all the way back on itself, just like this. And now you can lay some thread wraps down over the nose of those butts. And that's going to make this nice streamlined bulkhead. And this is a good technique for creating body. And it's going to push a lot of water, but it's not going to add a lot of weight to the fly. So I'm going to rip this out quick. And the next technique is called the reverse tie. I'm sure you guys have heard of this a lot. Get my bobbin back here. So for the reverse tie, instead of tying in our bucktail with the points going toward, off the back of the hook, we're going to spin it around like this. So the points are facing the eye of the hook. Then we're going to start doing some wraps. 2 to 3 wraps, get it situated where you want it around the hook shank. Pull it down. It should start to flare a little bit. Then you can still kind of maneuver it. And now you're going to have this nice flaring side up here. If you take a pen, an old pen, or even your fingers, you're going to push all this back, but the pen works really well. Bring your thread forward, and then you're going to make a big thread dam in front of that. And that should hold it down. And the beauty of this technique is it adds a lot of profile to the fly without adding a lot of density. And then this back part here, this part right here, it protects all of your previous wraps. So it makes the fly a lot more durable. So as you start building up more of these reverse ties, you're going to get a nice solid body and good profile out there with a very durable fly at the end. So that's that technique. And I'm going to take this out. We'll do one more technique, and then we're going to get into the actual flies. I don't think I did enough thread wraps here. All right. So I talked about that B side a little bit earlier. This stuff is really good for spinning. It's just like deer body hair. It has good spinning qualities to it. And it's really good for making Buford heads. So I'm just going to cut off a big section. Big old clump. So I got this big old messy clump right here. You can see all those disgusting under fibers. I'm just going to take a comb all those out. All right, now I'm going to cut her off straight. All right. I'm going to bring my thread all the way to the front because I'm going to kind of mimic a Buford head right now. So when people first start getting into tying bucktail, it's really intimidating, to try to learn how to spin bucktail because it can be kind of complicated and not all the fibers are going to want to work all the time. But I have a pretty good surefire trick that'll give you a good Buford head almost every time. So instead of putting your bucktail on top of the shank like this, and then trying to spin it around the shank evenly, if you're to take, where's my camera? Take the middle part here and plunge the hook eye right through the middle of that. Do a couple loose wraps. And now pull up on it. You see how nice of a head that makes right there? It's pretty even all the way around. Let's see. You'll get a really nice Buford head almost every time. So that's just kind of a good surefire foolproof method of making nice Buford heads. This is also a good technique if you're stacking deer hair and you're using it to trim up a head and whatnot too. All righty. So we're going to start with the bulkhead deceiver. I was going to cut this hook off quick. And I sent you guys a list beforehand with all sorts of materials and hook sizes and whatnot. For this fly today, we're going to be using use an Eagle Claw 2-aught hook. It's got a nice hook gap in there. And this is a good size hook for making bass bugs and pike bugs and whatnot. All right, so to help everybody out, I made a diagram of how this is actually going to go down. So we're going to have 3 tie-in points. The first one's right here, and that's going to be our tail section. And then we're going to add a little bit of flashaboo or polar flash. And then we're going to do our next section, which is the bulkhead style tie. And then we're going to finish it off with our third section, which is our final bulkhead tie. And you can see I made like a little mark here. You want this tail to be about a shank and a half to 2 shanks in length. That'll give it a good proportion. And the tail dictates the ultimate size of the fly. And then as we go up the shank, we're going to make all of these gaps about 1/3 smaller. So that way you get a nice taper in the end. And when this fly gets wet, it's going to have a nice profile like this. I usually start on a hook like this. I usually start my first tie right in front of the point. So let's get after it. I'm using the Regal medallion vise with the monster jaws, by the way. This is a good vise. It holds hooks in the bigger sizes like 2-aught up to 8-aught. If you have a Trout vise, it's going to be difficult to hold anything above probably a 2-aught, but you can kind of make it work. So I'm just going to lay down a nice thread base going down the shank. I'm going to go a little bit past the hook eye, and then I'm going to come back to the hook point here. All right. So I'll grab a little section of bucktail. Pulling out all these crappy little fibers. And it's about a pencil width. That's a common term you'll hear a lot in musky and bass tying. Grab a pencil width of bucktail. So I got all that stuff out. All right, I'm going to spin my thread. Do about 2 to 3 loose wraps just to get it kind of seated. I'm going to move it around just a little bit. And when I got it where I want it, I'll pull straight down and start applying even pressure just like this. And it kind of looks like it's flaring out a little bit. So I'm going to just do a couple more loose wraps down the tail to kind of control that. Now, if you're big into super glue, this is a point in the fly where you might want to consider gluing it. I'm just using this crazy glue stuff. It's got a brush applicator. Just put a couple swabs on there. Not everybody uses glue, but I like my flies to last more than a couple fish. All right, so we got our tail section in. So now we're gonna grab our flash. So this is like polar flash. You can use normal Flashabou. I probably wouldn't use Magnum Flashabou on a fly this size. It's just a little bit too bulky. I'm gonna grab about 10 fibers or so. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna double this over and we're gonna bring it around the thread. Pull it up, and then we're gonna tie it in on itself. And again, we're gonna do just a couple loose wraps just like that. And now with my thumb on the top, I'm gonna finagle all this flash around the body of the tail there. Just like that. All right, we're gonna go up to our next tie-in point. So for that, we're gonna cut off a little bit more bucktail. Got to pull all these fibers out. These fibers also will, they have a tendency to break your thread. So it's important to get all that underbrush out of there. Now, remember I was talking about making a taper on the fly. So instead of keeping these fibers the full length, I'm going to chop them down just a little bit. And we're going to go into our first bulkhead tie. And I'm not right at the, the end of where the tail was. I advanced my thread up just a little bit, about 1/8 to 1/4 inch or so, depending on your hook length. We're going to do this bulkhead tie, couple loose wraps, work it around the hook shank here. If you have a rotary vise, this is a good time to implement that feature and flip the fly over so you got a nice even distribution of bucktail. Whoop, I lost a little bit there. Alrighty. Now with my pen tool, I'm gonna take that bucktail, push it back on itself here. Tie down that nose. And then put a little bit of glue on there. All right. So now we're gonna go back to our Flashabou. Again, grab about 10 strands or so. And I'm not worried about cutting the Flashabou to length at this stage because I got a trick that we'll do at the end to get it all trimmed up nice and neat. So again, just tie it in on the top, 50-50, fold it over, double it over on the thread, and then use your thumb to distribute that flash around the body of the fly. The cool thing with this fly design too is it doesn't entirely matter if you're super accurate with all of your bucktail distribution, because by the time you get to the end, it's all going to blend together anyways. Alrighty, let's go up to our third bulkhead tie-in point. Okay, got about another pencil width of bucktail. Oh, guys, I was going to mention, if you have any of these little hair clips, you can get them at, Walmart or Walgreens or CVS. They work super great for holding all this material down. Then it's not in your way. Couple loose wraps here. Distribute the bucktail around the shank and the body. Alrighty. And we're going to fold this back on itself. Tie that in. All right, so we're getting this nice streamlined body here that's building up quite a bulkhead in the middle of this fly. If you find some fibers that are kind of just untamable, it's okay to take your scissors and kind of feather them out a little bit as you rotate your vise. Alrighty. So on this one, I'm going to skip the flash because we're going to go into the head section now. So for the head, I'm going to use red because you can't go wrong with the Daredevil colors. And as you can see, the fibers on this are already a lot, oops, backwards, are already a lot smaller than this white bucktail by quite a bit. All right, clean out all those fibers. I'm pretty sure that this tail is older than I am, but it's still working quite well. All right, so I got a little section for the head, again, about a pencil width. I cut it off flat. And here we go. We're going to go into the head now. So spin your thread. Couple loose wraps here. Work it around the body of the fly. And then come in with the pen tool, fold it back over on itself. And if you've measured this correctly, you should have enough space before that eye to build up a nice little thread dam. And what you can do is, while you're building up this thread dam, take a little bit of super glue, put it on that eye. And as that's kind of drying, it'll hold that head almost in place. And then you'll get a super secure thread dam as you're spinning it. All right. And then since we put a bunch of super glue on there, I'm just going to do 1/2 inch. Cut her on off. And now I can go back in, trim up a little bit of the head if I need to. But other than that, she's pretty much done. And if you see like a little bit too much bucktail on the bottom, don't be shy. And you can kind of feather it in with your scissors a little bit. Now, I mentioned that trick earlier about cutting your flashaboo. So what you can do is hold the fly upside down like this. All the flashaboo is going to dangle down. And then with one kind of false swoop, you're just going to kind of cut and taper it. And that'll give the bug a really nice taper. It'll look really natural. And all those flashaboo ends will be kind of a random length. Whoa. So there we go. Bucktail deceiver, bulkhead bucktail deceiver. You can tie those things up in all sorts of colors. Here's a couple bigger ones that I tied the other day. These are on like a 5/0 hook. So these are good for They're really good for pike, early season muskies. Bass will crush this type of thing as well. You can get really fancy with them and start adding like different tones. So this is more of a perch pattern. It's got a nice light underbody, and then it's got a dark wing for the back portion. So yeah, the sky's the limit. Use your creativity and challenge yourself with some new color patterns and designs and whatnot. We could do questions right now. Otherwise, we can roll right into the Buford if you guys want as well. Buford? Everyone's on mute. I can't hear anything.
Hey, Josh, what size thread are you using?
Oh, sure. So this is a 150 GSP thread. This is made by Vivas. This stuff is very, very strong. It looks like this. Can you read that? This stuff is essentially almost like dental floss. It's super, super strong. This comes in a 150 denier and a 200 denier. But a lot of guys like to do the 150 denier because it's not so bulky and it works well for bass bugs and musky bugs too. Can't tell if it's strong by how you reamed on it. Yeah, it's pretty strong stuff. If I'm breaking it, I mean, that's not a good thing, but it takes a lot to break this stuff. They don't call me Bam Bam for no reason.
That was my second question. How did you get Bam Bam? And this better be a good story.
It's a very good story. It's a long story. It was featured on one of the episodes of the SVS podcast, but I'll make it really quick. It was during a musky tournament up in Hayward several years ago, and I ended up breaking 3 fly rods in the course of a weekend. And I broke 5 fly rods that season, but the first fly rod that we broke that weekend, we had a musky on, and a bear hunting dog swam across the river and got tangled in the musky line while we were landing the fish, and it snapped the rod. It was crazy. Alrighty. Any more questions on the bulkhead deceiver? The veers is very slippery. Oh, the Vivas, yes. This thread is very slippery, so it does take a little bit of time to get used to. It's a really static thread, so it doesn't have any give to it. So they make other thread. I think it's called like Uni Big Fly. That I think that has a little bit more of a stretch, but this stuff hardly has any stretch, and it's pretty slick. So it does take a little bit of time to get used to, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty natural. See if I need more thread. Here's another common thread that people use, UTC. This is a 140 denier, so it's a little bit light. Oh, I missed that last question. It just left my screen. Did someone just ask a question?
Josh, the question from Dick is, what scissors do you use for deer hair?
Honestly, the best scissors I've found is available at Hobby Lobby or Joann Fabrics or Michaels. This is just your standard craft scissors. It comes in 2 different sizes, and I really like the small size here. It's super durable. It's called the Westcott Titanium. You guys can see that. But when you're dealing with bucktail and lots of cutting and lots of big fibers, you know, it just handles materials a little better. You know, this is your standard tine scissors. You can see just how much bigger this one is. And this is the small size. I have the really big size laying around somewhere, but I just really like this scissors. It's really nice. I might as well talk about the bobbin quick too. This bobbin is made by Schmahen, I think. Schmain. I don't know how to pronounce this. It's got a tension ring in here, so you can adjust the tension, which is kind of nice. But this is a super durable bobbin that holds up well to these bigger fibers. Some of those smaller, cheaper bobbins, like the Dr. Slick ones, you'll eventually snap them off right here at the joint. Let's see here. Do I have one? This is hands down the worst bobbin on the market, the Loon one. They make a ton of great products, but unfortunately, this one is not one of those great products. So I would stay away from this bobbin in particular if you're going to be doing big game flies.
Okay, I think that's it for the questions. I'll keep watching it for you.
Okay, sounds good. All right, guys, so we're going to go into your standard single hook Buford next. And before we do that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about fly coloring, just so everyone kind of knows, you know, they have like a little bit of a cheat sheet or a reference to go off of. A couple years ago, I made all these charts. So this is common fish species and forage that lives in our Chippewa system. So I have a page of all like rough fish on this one. And then I've taken like the colors out of their bodies and I've kind of made like a little bit of a color graph below. So I can easily reference, like if I want to tie a red horse pattern, I kind of know what bucktails and fibers to use. Same thing with this one. This is a game species chart. And then I've taken a bunch of like musky lures that have been created that are pretty popular. And I look at the coloring on those to kind of replicate that throughout the fly as well. So those are just kind of some neat little tricks and references, because I struggled with coloring flies for a long time. You're the first person I've ever met that. Oops. What was that question?
You're the first person I've ever met who translated this to making it into patterns.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Because otherwise you could just be tying all willy-nilly and this stuff's expensive and you don't want to waste it. Another thing with coloring flies, once you get the hang of building up these bigger flies and understanding the functionality of them and everything, you can start to experiment with coloring of flies. So if you look at a fish's, you know, basically every fish has the same type of coloring on them. Let's just pull up this fish, for instance, right here. It's got a light underbelly. It's got midtones throughout the body, and then the top part is dark. And as you get towards the head, their heads are usually a little bit darker. So when you're tying a fly, a lot of guys, you know, they'll put an accent color for the tail, and then they'll do light colors for the body or the underbelly, and then they'll do the midtones in the body and then darks up above, and they'll end with a dark head. Like this catfish has a dark head. This sucker has a dark head. And how that translates to a fly is we have the accents in the tail, got some striping there. And then this underbelly is light. And then the top shoulders are starting to get darker and they fade into this dark head right here. Also, we put flash on top a lot of the times because that's where the light is going to be reflecting off the back shoulders of the fly. So that's just going to add a little bit more of attraction to these bugs. One more thing I'll talk about quick before we get into this fly is the designs of both of these flies and the hydrodynamics that go with them This is all really slick material in the back. So this isn't going to catch much water. But once you get up towards the front, there's a lot more friction. And what that does is this fly is going to want to stall out when you're stripping it in. And so if you're stripping this fly in, you're pulling it really fast, and then it's going to dive, and it's going to catch currents, stuff like that. And it's just going to keep wanting to walk the dog. And that's what's going to trigger a strike. If you were to just, reel this straight in like a straight bait, that doesn't look like a dying fish. That looks like a healthy fish. But when a fish is kind of dying or towards the end of its life or whatever, it's going to want to stall out and swim all funky. Sometimes it can't right itself, and it's just going to kind of like flounder on the surface. So that's kind of the functionality of these flies. Huge water push on the front and super slick, low friction on the back here. All right, so let's tie this bad boy. So we are going to be starting with a Gamakatsu B10S stinger hook. This is in the 5/0 size. This is a very common size hook. Very common hook. It's got a really aggressive hook point and hook gap in there. And some hooks, they'll come straight around like this and go straight out. This one, when you were to set the hook, it's going to want to go right up into the fish's mouth, just like that. So it's all about getting that business end of the hook into the fish's mouth so you can get a good set on them. This also has a really good wire gauge too, so it's going to hold up to a lot of fish. You don't have to worry about it bending out and whatnot too. Alrighty, put that in the jaws. Get my thread going here. So I'm just going to lay down a nice thread base down the shank. Cut off this excess. If you're working with this Vivus GSP, you do need to have really sharp scissors because it's very tough stuff. So again, I'm just going to go right past the hook bend. I'm going to go back up, and I'm just going to let my thread drop right in front of that hook point. If you guys can all see that. So that's where we're going to start the fly. And the reason we're doing that is because it still has a little bit of horizontal qualities before it goes into the bend. So it'll keep that tail nice and straight. Alrighty. So for this guy, I'm going to grab some really long fibers for the tail. We want those really long because they're going to create a rudder and help hold up the feathers here. So I'm going to grab about a pencil's width again. I'm going to pull out all of this underbrush. Cut it off flat. And now we're ready to tie. Again, we're going to spin our thread so we get a nice tight cinch down there. Do a couple thread wraps that are fairly loose. Move it into position, and then you can crank straight down on it. Start tying it in. Alrighty. Now the formula we're going to be using on these Bufords, it's called fur, feather, and flash. And Brad Bowen kind of coined that term years ago when he designed these Buford style flies. So we're going to start with fur, we're going to add feathers, and then we're going to end with flash for that cycle. Then we're going to begin it all over again and do fur, feather, flash as we go up the body. So again, if you're into gluing your flies, this is a good time to put a little bit of glue down. Then we're going to grab some feathers here. These are called Schlappen feathers. This particular feather has a grizzly pattern, so that's the black barring you see. And then these have been custom dyed, so they have a really nice like ombre tequila sunrise fade. They look great. Super nice to tie with. So I grab two feathers that are pretty similar, cut them down at the base. And now this fly, we're going to do about 2.5 to about 3 shanks lengths long for the tail here. So about that long. I'm going to tie in my first side, and I'm going to leave these butts on the feather, and I'm going to show you why in a second. I'm going to match it up, tie in the other side. You might have to finagle them down just a little bit. All right, so now those are tied in securely on both sides. And the reason I'm leaving these butts in is what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up on these. I'm going to tie over the top of those butts. And that's going to give it a super secure tying point. Once I get that seated, I'll cut these butts off. And now those feathers are good to go. So essentially right now we're building the rudder of the fly. And this is going to help the fly track a little bit so it's not all wonky and all over the place. All right, so fur, feather, and flash. We just did our fur and our feathers, so it's time for some flash. This one we're using copper colored Magnum Flashaboo. I'm gonna take about, I don't know, 5 strands or so. Pretty long. Again, we're gonna double this up. Tie it in. And then we're just going to use our thumb to tease it over the top here. All right. Now these ones are a little bit long, so I'm just going to cut them right now. But again, we'll do that trick where we cut them at the end. This is where the clips start to come in really handy. If you got these clips, clamp it all down. All right, so we just did our first cycle of fur, feather, and flash. Now we're going to start with fur again. Get some more bucktail here. Cut off about a pencil width. Oh, like that. I'm going to cut all the butts flat. And now this one, instead of straight tying it in, we're going to start reverse tying it. So that's that technique I showed you earlier. So you're going to flip your bucktail around so the tips are facing the hook eye. And you're going to do a couple loose wraps here. And just tease it around the shank. Pull down, and as you pull down, it'll start to spin a little bit and start to flare out nicely. You can take your fingers and kind of like really work it evenly around there. Grab your pen tool, get a better pen tool, and shove all these fibers back on itself, just like that. Then you pull your thread forward and you start to build up a thread dam here. Now, a lot of guys, they go super nuts with these thread dams. And it's kind of a balancing act because you do want these fibers to splay backwards. You don't want them sticking entirely straight up, but you are going to have those things splaying back a little bit. At least towards the tail. When you get up towards the shoulders, you can have them flaring out a little bit more. If you find yourself really having trouble with this bucktail flaring out, you can do some wraps on it like this to kind of tame it down. And it's kind of all preference as you're building the fly, basically how much you want this thing flared out. Another trick too is you can clamp this down right here, put a little bit of glue on it, put some glue up on the nose of all those bucktail fibers. And then you can kind of just, use your fingers to feather it over that. And that should hold it in place pretty well. All right. So while that's drying, I'm going to clamp it back down again. Now we're going to go back into our feathers. I think I'm going to use some different feathers. These ones are super cool. They got that nice fade on there, but they don't have the grizzly pattern. And these are a little bit thinner, so they're going to have a little bit more action to them. So I'll grab 2 feathers that kind of match. All right. And now these feathers, I don't want them going all the way to the back tail. I want them to come up just a little bit short. Okay. And then matching the other side here, this feather. Again, leaving those butts in. All right. I'm tying them in, advancing my thread forward. I'm going to pull up on these butts, and then I'm just going to wrap the thread back over the butts right there to give it a nice secure connection. Cut those guys off. All right. Now we're back to our flash. So again, grab about, I don't know, however many strands you want, 5 to 10. I'm going to grab the middle of it. I got flash everywhere. Grab the middle, double it over, put it around your thread, tie it in, and then tease it around the body of that fly. Just like that. All righty. So some people say that muskies prefer flies with a little bit less flash, and pike like flies with a little bit more flash. I don't know if that's entirely true or not. What I do know is on a dark day, you probably want to be fishing flies that have a little bit less flash or no flash in them. Or on like a super sunny day, you're going to be wanting to fish flies that have a lot of flash in them. All right, so we just did fur, feather, flash, fur, feather, flash. So now we're back to the fur. Grab our bucktail here. When I first started tying these flies, I used to put way too much bucktail in them. And after you spend a 10-hour day casting them, you're going to wish you tied them a little bit lighter. All right, so I cut off about another pencil's width, as they say, and we're going to reverse tie this in, spin our thread. Couple loose wraps here, 2 or 3. Kind of start to pull down and just work it around that shank till it's nice and even. And then once I get it to where I want it, pull straight down. Start doing my wraps with consistent thread pressure. Alrighty, can kind of work that out. Take your pen tool, shove it back. And then start to build up that thread dam in front of the nose of that tie-in point. I'm just going to put a little glue on here to help secure it and help get a good position on the flare. Alrighty. Now, depending on your hook length, you might be ready to start going into your Buford head. but this hook is a little bit longer. So I'm just going to do one more cycle of the fur, feather, and flash. So we're back to the feathers again. Grab my feathers, chop them off. Again, we're going to make these feathers just a little bit shorter than the previous set. Just like that. At this point in the fly, you could actually transition into darker feathers, and that could almost simulate like a lateral line on a largemouth bass or something. Oh, little tangle. All right. Pull those butts up, secure them in, and chop them off. Okay. All right, do a little bit more flash. I kind of went nuts on the last round, so I'm going to do this one a little bit lighter. All right. Fur, feather, flash, fur, feather, flash. So now we're back to fur again. So this is our last section of reverse tying fur before we go into the head. All right, about another pencil width. And I'm going to cut this a little bit shorter than the previous clump just because, you know, now we're kind of tapering down towards the nose of the fish. So I don't want these shoulders to be gigantic. So again, spin your thread. Pop it on top with a couple loose wraps here. Work that material around the shank. Pull down and it should start to flare a little bit. So you see this little bit of a bump right there with all those butt ends? That protects all of my previous tie-in points. And that's what's going to make this fly super durable and last for multiple fish, multiple seasons. All right. Pull those fibers back. Get my thread dam going. Put a little bit of glue on there. Alrighty. So we got a nice profile going here. And we are ready for the Buford head. All right. So we're going to go grab our bucktail and we're going to cut some material off the B side, like I talked about earlier. And I'm probably going to grab some down here. These have the most hollow fibers on the whole part of the bucktail, and they spin so beautifully. Now for the Buford heads, you're going to want a pretty decent chunk. So I'm probably going to be doing more of like, you know, a thick Sharpie width or like an Expo marker width of fiber. Oh. It's a lot thicker. And again, these fibers down by the butt section of the tail, they have a ton of underbrush. So you got to clean all of that stuff out. That's going to make your life a lot easier when you try to work this and get a nice flare to it. Also, the dirty secret about elk hair caddises, they're not made with real elk hair. They're made with deer hair. And that's because by the time you cut the elk hair down to length, you don't have any of those hollow fibers left. But with deer hair, the fibers are short enough where it makes a very effective dry fly. but we'll get back to musky flies. So on these, I'm going to cut it flat. Just like that. We got a nice clean clump. And then again, we're going to do that trick where we shove the hook eye right in the center of this clump. I'm going to do a couple loose wraps here. And then I'm just going to pull straight down. And that'll get that head to flare out beautifully. Now, as you're spinning your thread through all of this stuff, you can kind of zigzag it, and that'll help it prevent it from catching fibers and mat up your head. Spin it around. All right. Now, this is where the pen tool comes in super handy. So I'm going to use the smaller end of this pen tool, find that hook eye, shove it back. And then with my left hand here, I'm holding all those fibers back. And I'm just going to try to build up a thread dam so all that stuff doesn't fall off the front of the hook. All right, now I'll hit it with a little bit of super glue here. Couple more wraps, and we'll end with a half hitch. Now, if you don't have that much room to get a half hitch in there with your fingers or get your whip finisher in there, if you take your pen tool and use it as if it was your finger, you can put a half hitch on it and then slide that thread down the nozzle of the pen tool while you're holding those fibers back. It's pretty handy. All right, couple half hitches. We got all this crap hanging off the back end of it, so I'm just gonna shave that off. Make sure you don't cut your feathers. They're pretty hard to put back on at this point. All righty, there's our Buford. And then again, it's got an accented tail. This one has a single colored, light colored body, almost like a moon eye. And then, you know, a dark head, nice natural color head. So as you guys are working with this bucktail, you'll experiment with how much you need to flare it, how much, you know, you like for the Buford head. Some guys like to build these heads up with like 2 or 3 rounds of spinning this stuff, but I like them pretty simple like this. It's all kind of personal preference. So, you know, tie a bunch of these, figure out how they fish, how you like to fish them too, and you'll come up with a winning formula. Cool. That's the end of the Buford. You guys got any questions?
Josh, Dave Valmer, if I sent me an email, and this is more about he's just started a musky fish, kind of like a lot of us, but it's more about how much leader material do you? I'll just read the whole thing here. What and how much leader material, with or without barrel swivels, floral, flexible wire, or straight wire bite guards, tie flies directly, use a stay lock or a fast hatch clip or a bite guard to each fly attached to the leader with a loop-to-loop connection. So basically, I just saw Steve Weisner wrote an article about, you know, leaders and rods and reels and stuff. So what is your recipe for, I guess, for basically leaders and stuff?
Sure. That's a super good question. And there's a lot of different answers to that. And again, it's like it's kind of based on preference and style, whatever you kind of prefer. I can grab my stuff super quick. I'll show you guys what I use for my leader setups. So I got this handy leader box from Cabela's, and it's got all these pouches in there where I can hold pre-tied leaders. I can hold all of my clasp, my wire, everything. It's super handy. So for my Musky leaders, I use either like a 40-pound. You can just use straight mono for this. This is a Maxima. It's got this nice camo color to it, so it works well in the Chippewa. That's 40-pound. And then this is a 50-pound Rio mono. Really, any mono will work, but you want this stuff to be pretty stout. From here, what I'll do is I'll grab the end and I'll pull it all the way to my armpit, and that'll be the butt section of my leader. From there, I usually go into wire. Steve and I both like to use wire a lot. And there's other guys out there that, you know, they absolutely hate wire. But I figure you're not going to see these muskies very often. And I'd rather get them in the boat than, you know, chance it to fluorocarbon. I've seen fluorocarbon leaders break, and I've also seen wire break as well. But for the most part, wire seems to hold up pretty well. I got a couple different wire options here. This is a Berkeley 30-pound wire. And that stuff is coated. Not sure what this is. AFW makes a nice wire too for making leaders. But you want this section to be a little bit lighter than your butt section. And it's crucial that you have a breaking point on your leader system that's lighter weight or less of a breaking point than your fly line. Because if your leader is stronger than your fly line and you get snagged, guess what's going to snap? Your fly line. And that's a lot more expensive to replace than a leader. So we always make sure that we have a weak point in our system that's weaker than the tensile strength of the fly line. So I'll do that butt section about an arm's length or so. And then with the wire, I'll cut off about, 12 to 15 inches or so. And then I'll tie that into the butt section. And then I like to use metal clasps a lot, because if you're switching flies often, it's super easy to switch them out frequently. And especially in cold weather, when your fingers aren't working, it's really easy to get those flies on and off. This is a common clasp that we use. It's a style that I prefer. It's got a little bit of a longer shank on there, and it's easy to get in and out of. Here's another style clasp. This is pretty popular amongst the trad guys, but it's super strong, but it's hard to get fly hooks on here sometimes. So that's kind of my preference for leader setups. If you're going to go into mono to floral, or if you're going to do floral to floral, this is some good stuff right here. This is a Cigar Blue label. I think they make like the pink label too, but this stuff is it's pretty affordable fluorocarbon as well. And the way that people attach that usually is they'll tie their bite guard section, essentially a floral, right into the fly, and then they'll loop to loop hook it with the butt section of their leader. Hopefully that makes sense.
Hey, Jeff, I thought you had your hand raised. Do you have a question for? Okay, anybody else has anything before we let Josh go here?
Damien, were you going to say something earlier?
Yeah, no, I just thought it was interesting. I like how you did the head on that Buford with, I think what a lot of guys will do is, like you said, they'll either stack it multiple ties, really get a blocky, bulky head. But I liked how you left the tips laying back into the taper, just made it look more natural, and it added, it just blended well. I like that. I was expecting you to cut those off and you didn't. I think that's kind of cool looking.
Yeah, some guys, they like a really pronounced head, and then it goes straight into the shoulders, but I like to blend all that stuff together. Make it a little bit.
My son just sent me pictures of some that he tied, and he actually, and you've seen this, I'm sure, they square them. They're like square blocks, the heads.
Oh, like the high density foam popper heads.
Yeah, except like they do it on a bucktail. They don't use that. He just does it with the bucktail. He'll square it off.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, the whole goal is to make it push water. Right. Some guys will meticulously cut every fiber, but these fish, they're not perfect robots. They're going to swim erratically, and you want this thing to look like it's dying.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yep.
Yeah, you did a great job.
Thank you. Somebody asked a question about what knots you use for leader setups. I think Steve has a pretty good tutorial on all that. And I know my buddy Pogo Pike, he's got a really good tutorial on YouTube for that as well. It's kind of too detailed to probably go in tonight, but I'd check out, the Albright knot, check out some other good knots, the polymer knot, the perfection loop. A lot of that stuff is used into tying big game leaders.
We have another one here. Are your loop-to-loop connecting the wire to the butt section?
Nope. You'd never want to connect a wire to mono or fluorocarbon with a loop-to-loop, just because those are two drastically different materials, and that wire could, even if it's coated, it could eventually shred through there. So if you're going to do that type of connection, you're probably going to want to use something like an Albright knot. You could potentially use a swivel. People that are fishing poppers pretty heavily, something with like this big square head, this thing might have a tendency to spin a lot in the air. So if you put a barrel swivel on your leader, that'll help prevent it from kinking up and everything.
Do you have any presentation that you'd like to use with both of those flies? Fast, slow, or whatever you feel like today?
Sure. Yeah. So in the springtime, we're fishing smaller flies, and depending on the water temperature, if it's really cold water temperature, you're probably going to want to be stripping those flies in a little bit slower. Kind of let them stall out. In the fall, you're definitely going to want to be fishing flies really slow, especially the big flies. You can almost like pull that thing in and pause, and it's just going to kind of flutter and die, and then do another strip. In the middle of the summer, you kind of want to burn flies sometimes. Like if you find fish that are kind of lethargic and they're not wanting to eat, to get them to really strike and really grab their attention, you can do that technique where you put your fly rod under your shoulder and you do the two-handed burn, and that'll get them to go nuts. And so when this thing is swimming super fast, it's kind of like, it's all crazy like that. And I caught a couple muskies last year doing the two-handed burn technique. But yeah, these flies, they fish pretty well at different presentations, but it's mostly dependent on water temperature. Just like trout, fishing in the wintertime when the water's colder and the metabolisms are a little bit lower, you just got to slow everything down.
Oh, this is not a question, but Jonathan said, great presentation. Thank you so much. Really like your Buford head. So somebody likes you anyway.
Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
Anything else, guys?
I just wanted to show Josh what just came. I got about 7 different colors of bucktail from Musky Fool.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. Yeah, he's a great guy. He's got a good thing going.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. My son got him for me. He's kind of buddies with him, and I think Brad Bowen is making them for him.
Yep. Yeah, he's supplying a lot of his Primo tail stock to the Musky Fool. So that's like the exclusive place to get that really nice Primo tail that Brad does.
Yeah. No, it seems nice.
I think I did see a question somebody had about synthetics. Do I ever use synthetics on flies? I'm going to go grab some really quick. All right. So this is more of a jerk style fly. I think this is called the Mega Jerk. This is a Gunnar Brammer pattern. And you see how skinny that profile is? We were tying these big, kind of cylindrical style body profiles. This one's super skinny. And what that does is it catches current seams really well, and it fishes just like a jerk bait. And then this one is articulated. So it has a piece of wire that connects 2 hooks together, and there's some beads in there. So this has a really good action, but this is tied with all synthetics. And the type of synthetics that I'm using, I get a lot of my stuff from Nightmare Musky Flies, and he does a good job of blending different materials together to kind of give it a natural look. There's that style. You can get fake bucktail. This stuff works really well for making long tails. It's all consistent, unlike organic bucktail. It doesn't have the same type of tying qualities, like it won't flare, but it's really good for making tails out of. This is called Wampa hair. They sell this at Lund's Fly Shop. It's a Misfit product, and it's pretty inexpensive, and it does a good job. But if you guys are interested in learning more, I highly suggest checking out Gunnar Brammer. He's an absolute phenom on the vise, and he's made an entire career out of tying. He's got a tying series called Tie Like a Pro. It's a 6-part series, and there's so many sweet techniques in that series, and you'll learn a lot.
Okay, you got one more chance before we release the hounds here. Okay, we got to remember it's 5 or 10 below zero, and it will warm up, and we'll be able to get out. So, hey, Josh, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that, and I now have another situation where I have to learn how to tie these flies. So I don't know if I'm going to live long enough to get all this stuff done, but I'm going to attempt it.
You're very welcome, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, we enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Any other?
Yep. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, you're welcome, guys. Good to see you.